Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's event marks the anniversary of when we, not the exact anniversary, but almost exactly a year since we started this series here at Holy Innocents on the crisis in church and society and how sacred tradition responds, in which we've heard so far from 11 different speakers on the topic, and tonight is our 12th, expressing a wide variety of perspectives. And we're pleased to conclude this series with one of the most crucial aspects of the crisis, its invasion into the home and family life via the crisis in marriage. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, let us pause for a moment to invoke the Holy Spirit upon our event, so that we may be guided by His wisdom in all that we say and do. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Ghost, fill the hearts of thy faithful, and kindle in them the fire of thy love. Send forth thy Spirit, and they shall be created, and thou shalt renew the face of the earth. O God, who taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Ghost, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Since 2004, Bai Macfarlane has been upholding the dignity of marriage in the light of no-fault divorce with the nonprofit organization Mary's Advocates. She is an advocate and supports those who are unjustly abandoned. For Catholics, Bai publicizes Catholic canon law and encourages faithful spouses to ask the Church to implement canon law with the hope of reconciling couples and preventing scandal and unjust divorce settlements. She also shows annulment defendants how to uphold their procedural rights. She has spoken in Rome for Human Life International Rome about the marriage crisis and the Code of Canon Law. Her paper was also distributed to delegates at the 2015 Synod of Bishops, and her work has been publicized in numerous publications, including the National Catholic Register, publications of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and LifeSite News. They went to Magnificat High School on Cleveland's West Side and earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Notre Dame. Before beginning her marriage work, she was a stay-at-home mom, raising 4 children under the age of 12. We are very pleased that she came all the way to visit us here at Holy Innocents. So on behalf of Grand Knight, new Grand Knight Johnny Egan, myself, past Grand Knight Thomas Vaniotis, the Parish Church of Holy Innocents, please join me in welcoming Bai Macfarlane.
Well, thank you, Thomas. Like Thomas said, you have been talking about crises and how the sacred tradition responds. And my topic is divorce and separation, both the crisis in the church and the crisis in society. Mary's Advocates, which is the nonprofit I founded, has twofold goal. One is to reduce unilateral no-fault divorce, and the other is to support those who are unjustly abandoned. And there's a population that we call separated faithful, who were divorced or separated, and they wanted to keep their families together. So I will be touching on how all of this affects them as I cover the topic. I got started in this because I became a divorce defendant, and I learned what no-fault really was. I had no idea, and I was really disheartened by the response I was getting from louder, maybe closer.
I'm right here and I can't hear you.
Okay.
No, but speak louder.
Speak louder.
Yes.
Should I start over?
No.
I appreciate the input, by the way. Thank you, Brian. I'm originally from Ohio. Are we good for the recording with this? Okay, so the people, we're recording this, and I am going to end up putting it on our YouTube channel, so that everything I already said, those people know. I would propose that what's happening with marriage right now is that everybody, almost everybody, is having man's view instead of God's view. And you know when Jesus was about to go to Jerusalem and he told the apostles that he was going to suffer, and Peter's like, no, you can't do that. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. You're looking at things with man's view and not God's view. And I'm not shocked that the state governments are looking at things with man's view, especially now. But we would at least expect the church to look at things from God's view And what I'm finding is that the leadership or the people speaking on behalf of a lot of Catholics are also looking at things from man's view, and it's not good. The path we're going to take as I speak is the government is messed up, and the church teaching and doctrine is great, and then the practice in the church is also messed up. And by messed up, what I mean is they don't even know what marriage is. They undermine marriage, and the way they're undermining marriage is like, it's kind of secretive, or people, I don't think the public knows. At least I hope not. And from the church's perspective, what's going on is actually absurd. It's so bad that I would say this is absurd. So as far as the government, they don't know what marriage is. They think marriage is just a status. Like you have the status of marriage, and if you do, you can buy property a certain way, and you can file your taxes a certain way. There's no expectation of permanence. There's no expectation of raising children in any kind of moral worldview. That's kind of irrelevant. They undermine marriage. Well, with the gay marriage thing now, they don't even know marriage is between a man and a woman anymore. So, and then no-fault divorce was another way that they're undermining marriage regularly, where it used to be that in order to get a divorce, you would have to show that the other party did something grave enough to justify separation of spouses, at least like adultery, for example. But now with no fault, someone can go to the government, say I want a divorce, and it shall be granted. And the reasons I say the public is ignorant, when I started my journey, I hadn't really involved in courts except for maybe a traffic violation or something. And I thought if it was happening in courts, I would expect it to be justice. And I would argue now that it's absolutely not. And people talk about how they got a divorce. He signed his divorce papers. It's presented as if both people are doing this unilaterally together, and they're not. What really happens is one person, they feel like they want to separate. So they go to the government, and they're basically saying, my spouse doesn't agree on how to be separated, so I'm giving you government power over our children, because the government will decide where the children go back and forth between which parent. I, as a plaintiff, am giving you government power over all our money, because the state courts will decide how to split all the property, and the state courts will also force support however they decide. But because it's no fault, they make no distinction between, say, a person who committed adultery, a person who didn't, a person who wants to keep the family together, and the person who's just choosing to leave even though the other person didn't do anything morally wrong. And then a divorce defendant, when you hear they both sign the papers, I would assert that they're coerced a lot of the time. Because as a divorce defendant, you're told that this divorce is going to happen, your children are going to be split, your property is going to be split. Either you agree with the plaintiff on how you want that to come down, and if you don't agree, then the judge can decide. And the judge might do something worse. So people are really being coerced, and from a separated person's perspective who's faithful to the marriage, they have to choose. Literally, do I sign a document that says, I also am asking the state to issue a divorce? Or they just hold their ground and they don't sign that document. But then they risk having their children taken away however the court decides, and their property taken away however the court decides, or no support because the court can decide to do whatever the court decides. And another thing that I hope the public is ignorant of, because I sure was, I thought if someone was like removed from their home because of domestic violence, they were dangerous. And I've had so many people call me over the years. It's usually the husbands. They're surprised. They get the sheriffs or the police show up wherever they are. And the first person I met this happened to, his son, he was like little, like not even 2 years old. The dad is reading bedtime stories. The police show up and say, your wife called and said there's a domestic violence problem and you have to get out of the house. And that's how the divorce started. And I get these calls, I mean, I could go on, but I want to be interested in the time. Oh yeah, these are Catholics, yeah. Yeah. And the in-laws are good Catholics, go to church on Sunday, kinds of people. Just to illustrate how crazy or how people are ignorant about what really goes on in divorce court, I got my hands on a report that a government psychologist wrote in a divorce case. And what happens is if mom and dad don't agree on how to split the children, the court can appoint a government psychologist, and the court can appoint a children's attorney. Then the court can order that when this case is done, the parents' assets, if they have any left, will be going to pay this government attorney for the children and this government psychologist. So this is a report from a government psychologist in a situation where this time it was a mom, and I've heard of this happening too. The mom didn't want the divorce, and this mom had been a stay-at-home mom, and her youngest was still in preschool. So the court psychologist has the party and the children meet with the psychologist in her office, with dad one time and with mom another time. So this psychologist report, let's see. The following is an addendum, blah, blah, blah. Of importance in this matter is Miss Blank's unwillingness to accept a divorce. It's her conviction that marriage is a binding contract, and she strongly asserts that her husband has violated this contract, tearing the family apart. Then she goes on about recent developments. The youngest child is enrolled in a combination daycare preschool. His father reported that he has not had any difficulty with the adjustment. Miss Blank feels it's unnecessary that her youngest child is in daycare, considering the fact that she's home during the day. During the visit with the child, okay, so this is the visit in the office of the psychologist. During the visit with the child, the mother asked him, "Where would you like to be during the day? School, mom's house, or dad's house?" And remind you, this is a situation where the children had had a stay-at-home mom until the divorce stuff started to get involved. So then the child responds he'd like to be with his mother. And mom also asked the child in my presence, "Why aren't you at my house anymore?" And the child responded, "Because daddy broke up our family." And then the psychologist says in her conclusions to the judge, "I understand that this divorce has been very difficult for the mother. It is problematic, however, that Ms. Blank continues to promulgate ideas in her children. Of great concern are her interactions with the child in my office. Specifically, she encouraged the child to state that his father was breaking up their family. Also of great concern is the fact that Ms. Blank appeared to view this as a positive. She's not demonstrated that she has an understanding of how this is potentially very damaging. While it is the court's purview to determine visitation, it frightens me that she seems to have learned very little about children's adjustments to divorce based on her unwillingness to accept this divorce. I do not see any problem with Ms. Blank having unsupervised overnight visits with her children, provided she ceases from promulgating negative views of their father." So the court psychologist deems a mom letting her children know in whatever way she can figure out how, church teaches that mom and dad's to stay together, but dad's choosing to go to court, and I'm sorry, or whatever a parent would say. And there's a network of separated faithful who communicate with each other about how do we deal with these situations. Because if we teach our kids, we try to teach our children in a way that's age appropriate, but also stand for marriage at the same time. So now I want to move over to the church. The church teaching on marriage, I think, is great. I'm guessing you do too, otherwise you wouldn't be coming to church. The church knows marriage is between a man and a woman. It's permanent. No spouse expects themselves to be replaced by another man down the road. You've got your wife and kids, you don't want some other man taking your place. Marriage is sexually faithful, it's open to children, it has primary and secondary ends, and by ends we mean what marriage is pointing towards. It's pointing towards openness to children and raising the children. If you don't have children, that doesn't mean you're not married, it's just that what marriage is pointing towards by nature. And it has secondary ends, which is mutual help and remedy for concupiscence. And by mutual help, it's just that, doing a family is a big undertaking, and having a husband and wife, a man and woman, helping each other out, helping the children out, that's a secondary end of marriage, is what you're pointing towards. The church also makes distinctions between separation, civil divorce, and annulment. And what I mean is, the default is that couples should stay together and have an intact home. But there are some times where separation is morally legitimate. If there really is violence and danger, and I've seen in studies that from the church's perspective, it can't just be like a one-time incident. It has to be the dangers repeated. It's really dangerous. Separation is the only way to protect people from this danger. So the church is recognizing that separation can be illicit sometimes. The church also has a canon law process to investigate and judge that. Like we hear about annulments being granted. Well, for centuries, there have been separation decrees granted where the church would investigate and say, this woman is justified in separating from her adulterous husband. You don't hear about those anymore. Then the church also talks about the difference between a civil separation and a civil divorce. And in both of those, the government forum is enforcing some kind of plan with children and property and support. But I forget which hand I put on which, but in civil separation, the parties are still civilly married, so neither of them could marry another person. In civil divorce, they could marry another person. And then the church has annulments, which we've heard of, which is they would do a study in a juridical process, actually a trial kind of thing, and they might conclude that the marriage was invalid, like it never really happened in the first place, or at least neither party is bound to it because of what happened in consent. An example that makes total sense is that if a young man, if any of you have no men who are in their 20s who are open to being married, they're dating a girl, she says she wants to have kids, they both say they want to have kids. 6 months go by, she's not having any kids, and she said she would. 2 years go by, she doesn't want to have any kids. And then it finally comes out, she really lied. She never intended to have children at all. So should this man be bound to act like he's married to a woman who committed fraud? Like, fraud is a reason for annulment. They call it simulation in canon law, not fraud. And another example would be, I know a real woman this happened to. She was married to a guy in the church, and it turns out he was having affairs all along. He never intended sexual fidelity, and that she found out about was the adultery, but all along he was committing fraud. And it's bad, and we hope that wouldn't happen, but I can see the goodness in saying, if someone's actually not married, we're not going to force them to act like they're married. And what I found is a lot of the laity are ignorant about what are the legitimate reasons for separation of spouses. And they have no clue about when it's appropriate or not to go to the civil court for divorce. So in 2007, the USCCB commissioned a study kind of to find out what's going on with the faithful about divorce. And they found in their survey 23% of adult Catholics have gone through divorce. 11% of adult Catholics have divorced and are currently either remarried, living with a partner, or widowed. These proportions are generally similar for those in the U.S. population as a whole. Catholics are behaving no differently than the secularists. And then they asked the people in the survey, what do you think a good reason for divorce is? How many people, would you guess, think that falling out of love is a good reason for divorce?
90%.
Well, it wasn't that bad. But of the people who were married, 53% said that falling out of love is a reason for divorce. And of the people who were divorced or separated, they said 68%. And now mind you, when Catholics get married, they don't just decide all that themselves privately to get married. They have to go through an investigation by a priest. It's a premarital investigation, and the priest's job is to find out, do these people understand what marriage is, and do they want marriage? So I could wonder, these people now who are saying falling out of love is the grounds for divorce, were they saying during their premarital investigation when the priest was talking to them about, marriage is good times and bad, you might have arguments with each other, and they're like, oh yeah, we know, we want permanence, yeah, we know. Or did they say, excuse me, oh, that's stupid. I know divorces can happen, I can get divorced if I fall out of love. It illustrates my point. So, what happens with separated faithful, though, because of this ignorance in the church, or amongst the people in the church, if they want to keep their family together, and they're both Catholic, they could go to family and friends, or in-laws, or even a priest, and they could ask for help. So could someone please tell my spouse, we can work through this, and he's obligated to try, and you shouldn't be getting a divorce. And the separated faithful get very little help from people, because there's this mindset of, or even there's sort of pressure. There's pressure that, well, if he fell out of love with you, well, your marriage is ended, your marriage is over. And a separated faithful person is left standing alone. It's like, I can't agree to that. I'm married, and I wish you would work on reconciling, but they can't do anything to stop it. And even if there was a reason for separation of spouses, like, say there's a woman, or both ways, like, say a woman is just really, really difficult, and the husband knows she's really difficult, and she kind of even knows she's difficult. If her husband cared about being a Catholic husband, he would be doing everything he could to get her the right kind of help. Or I know of a woman in Ohio who she says the dynamic between she and her husband is real unhealthy, and it's like really nasty, really nasty stuff. And she's like, I think he learned that from his mom and dad, because the dad was really nasty too. She didn't file for divorce. She was bending over backwards trying to find the right kind of help of people who have experience, who are pro-marriage. It's like the problems people are having in their marriages now, I really believe these are the same problems that they've been having for centuries. People aren't that much different. And there's solutions. No marriage is that special that you have some problem that no one's ever had before. So then, if the separated faithful can't get anybody's help saying the other spouse shouldn't file for divorce, there's even something in the catechism that's used against separated faithful. And the catechism teaches that divorce is a grave offense against nature, it's immoral, but then it also says there's a big difference between the person who was faithful and the person who destroyed a canonically valid marriage. So here's the loophole. If the separated faithful is trying to get help, other people could say, well, you probably don't have a valid marriage anyway. I mean, he wants a divorce, you're having all these troubles, it's probably not a valid marriage anyway. And this is where another set of statistics come in. There's a Canon Law Society of America, they have conferences every year. For years they were publishing statistics on how many annulments were given in different tribunals. They stopped in 2016 publishing this for whatever reason. So that's the last data I have. And they only got the data for about half the diocese. Everyone's required to report to Rome, but they're not all required to show it with the Canon Law Society. Now what happens is I sorted it by the percentage. What percentages are the annulments being granted in these tribunals? So I've got the ones that grant 100%, there are tribunals that grant 100%, every single petitioner gets an annulment, down to the ones who don't give annulments to everyone. You have to go through the first third to get to a diocese that denies 1%. The top third give them to 100%. I mean, I rounded to the nearest tenth, so, Then, you've got to go to the top 2/3 to find a diocese that denies them 4%. The top 2/3 are giving annulments to every single petitioner except 1, 2, or 3%. Then you have to go to the very bottom, the bottom 10th of this listing, to find a diocese that denies them 10% of the time. And then at the very, very bottom is Madison, Wisconsin. And I say, God bless Bishop Morlino, rest his soul, he's passed. He was interviewed on EWTN with Raymond Arroyo. And he said, just real calmly, oh yeah, the U.S. tribunals and canonists have been...
I'm cutting into the pre-recorded video to let viewers watch Bishop Morlino directly.
Automatic review. That second hearing, that automatic review is now done away with. A good move, or is this going to open up the annulment process to more abuse?
Well, again, the fact that something can be abused doesn't necessarily count against it. The annulment processes in the United States honestly have been abused for many years.
Right.
So this wouldn't be anything new.
And I could find I could tell you more sources that say the same thing. Like, I've been collecting this on my website for a long time when people who are in a position to know say this kind of stuff. So this begs the question, what is going on? And I think what I found is let me get my focus here. So I started studying about the process of annulment when some of these separated faithful found themselves as defendants against accusations of invalidity. And the process makes sense. I'm not going to bore you with the explanation of it. But what's happening is the practice is messed up. A lot of tribunals have raised the bar so high for a valid marriage that they can give annulments to 100% of the petitioners. Or they're cheating on the process. And that discussion is for another time. But just as one example of someone who's saying this, like, I'm not making this up, Father Gerald Murray, who's regularly on EWTN's Papal Posse. I don't know if you know who he is.
He spoke here.
He was one of our speakers.
Excellent.
And we have the book.
Good. Okay, so this audience knows Father Gerald Murray. He was on a podcast recently, and he was talking about when he got his dissertation when he got his doctorate in canon law in 1998. he came back to New York to work at the tribunal, and he asked the guy in charge of the tribunal how many annulments are granted here, and the answer was about 800 a year. And then he asked, well, how many are denied? And the guy says, well, maybe 2 or 3. And then Father Murray goes on, I'm just relaying, the tribunal's perspective was everyone who petitions, who participates in the process, should get their annulment. And the grounds they use is some kind of psychological immaturity at the time of consent. And then Father Murray says, I just got my doctorate in Rome, and that is not what Rome is saying should be happening over here. And he ended up not staying at that tribunal. But I'm actually cutting this part out. I was going to give you examples of how separated faithful are getting mixed up by the process, but it would take too much time. What I see in tribunals is a lot of times they write to the parties, or they even say on the website, we're looking for truth, and we're not blaming anyone. And if the most popular grounds for annulment is the psychological ground, Pope John Paul II said in 1988, that this psychological ground only applies for people who have severe forms of psychopathology. So if tribunals are saying we don't blame anyone, but they find the annulment because the petitioner had a severe form of psychopathology, would it be unfair to say they're blaming the petitioner? And what I'm finding is sometimes the petitioners don't even know what's happening because they just answer a lengthy questionnaire, and then however many months go by, and they say your annulment's granted, and they don't even know what was going on. So this is not good. And the thing that was troubling me as I'm doing my research and talking to these people, and I'm learning about how the church's response is kind of disheartening about divorce, the tribunals in the United States require a civil divorce before they'll take an investigation up for an annulment. But then the Catechism says divorce is a grave offense against nature and immoral. Didn't make sense. And then I found what the church teaching in canon law actually was, and it does make sense, but it's not publicized. It hasn't been publicized in the United States hardly at all. And I would say it kind of died around the same time as the sexual revolution in the 60s. Have you ever heard people say, it's not the divorce that's wrong in and of itself, it's only remarriage without an annulment? Have you ever heard that? And that's just incorrect. That's an error. And there's a woman who, she's kind of, I won't say anything. I'll just say, there's a lady who developed a program that's called the Divorce Survival Guide. And a lot of dioceses use this program. It's got videos and workbooks and things for people who have gone through divorce. And she was a guest speaker at the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia in September of 2015, and she's interviewed on radio and stuff at this time. So in an interview, I transcribed what she said. The church doesn't really have any teaching on divorce because that's a civil term. And she does not concern herself with civil divorce in that she understands we go through that sometimes. But she is in the business of upholding a valid marriage. And she knows that sometimes when a civil divorce happens and somebody is finding themselves in that situation, the church, that is they, help the person take a look at what happened before and right up to around the time they said, I do. And I have to object to her answer because she describes divorce as something people sometimes go through. When I'm driving, which people around here don't do because they're too crowded, I go through a rainstorm. If somebody's spouse files for divorce, it just seems like that's not a fair description. Somebody's filing for divorce and the other person either also wants it, or they're a defendant who's a separated faithful and they're coerced, or they just stand there and hold their ground and you get an order forced on them and their kids. But this woman was given a podium, a whole room full of people, by the whoever organized the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. So I went to the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, and I went around and I was distributing a flyer, show and tell. There was 3 of us who were distributing this flyer, which was talking about what I learned about church teaching, and I had found that there's a process to ask the church to intervene in cases of separation. There's a whole dissertation by some lady that's now a professor in canon law in Spain about the church can have a finding of malicious abandonment. So if there's two Catholics, like the guy with the young child, if his wife thought she was a serious Catholic and he wasn't being domestically violent, if everyone was following canon law, he could have gone to the church and said, I need help. I think my wife is abandoning the marriage, but she seems to think she's justified. And then the church would do an investigation and they'd have a finding, and they could bring in witnesses, and then they would find out. And they would also try to encourage reconciliation. The canon law requires the church to try to facilitate reconciliation prior to hearing a separation case, which is before any divorce or anything. So I'm distributing these flyers. So it's September of 2015. I go to Rome afterwards and I give my talk, and I presented a paper that got printed up in this book that got given to all the bishops at the Bishop's Synod. 2 months later, a letter comes out from the guy who has the job of, where's my letter? I can't go there yet. I forgot some of my content. I was showing people these research findings and showing them how to ask the church to petition. But I also found that the church requires one to have one's bishop's permission prior to filing for a civil divorce or civil separation. And this goes back to the Council of Trent. So 1563, Council of Trent, I'm just going to read this one because it's fun. If one saith that matrimonial causes do not belong to the ecclesiastical judges, let him be anathema. And that's like excommunication back then. And if one says that matrimonial causes means full separation cases and annulment cases, if you say those don't belong to the church judges, you're wrong. So I'm like, wow, that makes sense. It makes sense. And then time goes by, a pope clarifies this. He says ecclesiastical judges alone. The lawyer here knows what exclusive competency means. You can't share it with anybody else. Then the equivalent of the CDF, Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that used to have a different name, they specify in a worldwide teaching that you have to have the judgment of the bishop okaying before anyone with a Catholic marriage would go to civil court for civil separation or divorce. In the United States, shortly after that, the U.S. bishops have these councils and they publish decrees and acts that are formal laws that apply in the United States. I think that rarely they just make them up. They instead are just publishing stuff that comes from the Holy See, publicizing this is enforced here. So the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore did that in 1886. And I want to read this one because I just love the way they say it. It belongs only to the church to whom the whole care of the sacraments by Christ has been entrusted, to make judgments about the validity of marriage and the rights and duties derived from the same marriage. Separation of spouses, do they need to live together? Should they be separated? Where should the kids be? Exclusive jurisdiction of the church. And then, in the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, this is the late 1800s, they went on to say, if you go to the civil forum for separation even, without your bishop's permission first, you incur grave guilt, and you shall be punished through the judgment of the bishop. So then, in my research finding, I'm finding the same teaching. Chicago, Detroit, Illinois, Ohio, this same, I guess it's called a particular law for Ohio, as well as the thing from the CDF. I'm going to call it CDF because I just don't want to say its old name. That's being publicized all over the United States. So we're up to 1886. In 1944 in Chicago, there was a good publicity of it that I liked because he made the distinction between civil divorce and civil separation. And he said that a person may licitly seek, this is the Vicar General, by the way, to some like forum to civil lawyers. A person may licitly seek a civil divorce in the following circumstances. And the first one is if the marriage has already been declared null. So evidently, not too long ago, the church was investigating whether a marriage was invalid or not before someone would go to the civil divorce court. And then it's also listed to go to the divorce court if the bishop decides there's sufficient reason for permanent separation or indefinite separation, but everybody knows they're just going there for the civil effects. Like, I'm not going to be a criminal for abandoning you, but they know, the bishop needs to know that the parties know we are not free to marry. So that was Chicago 1944. And then about separation cases, he also emphasizes you have to have the bishop's permission first before you go to the civil forum. Then passes, Vatican II happens, the Holy See is going to reorganize the canon law, the 1983 code comes out. Not only was it publicized by the old CDF, now the canon law itself specifically says that you have to have the bishop's permission before you, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, you have to have the bishop's permission before you file for civil divorce. So this is what I'm publicizing when I'm walking around in this Philadelphia meeting on families. And my paper in Rome got given to all the bishops. And evidently this was kind of controversial, because I guess the US bishops aren't doing this or haven't been doing it for decades. And the guy who's in charge of the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts, like you've heard of the Pontifical Council of the Family, we've heard of the CDF, Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. There's different councils responsible for different things in Rome. And there's one that's the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts, and their job is to give official interpretations of canon law. So 2 months after my paper gets distributed, a letter shows up from him. And he basically turned my research findings upside down. And he says, he's responding to a bishop. He doesn't name the bishop he's responding to, but he's responding to a bishop. He's like, Your Excellency, to answer your question regarding to the matters of communications on such and so date. He turned the canon law upside down. So now, here's this little lady passing out a flyer, giving a talk in Rome, and there's this big guy who's in charge of the Pontifical Council of Legislative Texts. But the interesting thing is, the guy is Cardinal Coco Palermo, who became infamous in 2017 because there was a police raid on a homosexual drug-fueled orgy in Vatican apartments, and the guy whose apartment it was, who's the one who worked for Cardinal Coco Palermo wanted that guy to be bishop. So I'm thinking, somebody who wants someone who's so addicted to homosexuality to be a bishop might not be a good person to tell us about canon law marriage. But that's where we are right now. That's where we are. So I'm getting near the end here. How am I doing on time, Thomas? Okay. People are still, I've been showing people how to petition the church to ask for investigations if they think the other person is abandoning unjustly. And I do suggest don't even trying it unless the other person cares about being Catholic, which they do sometimes. And there was a woman in New Jersey, and she just wanted somebody to tell her husband, you can't do what you're doing and call yourself a good Catholic. And in the civil forum, she and her husband were both lawyers before they got married. She became a stay-at-home mom. 3 children, the husband wants divorce. So he goes to civil court in New Jersey to get a divorce. It's going to be no fault. She cannot put on paper that she agrees to divorce because it's a lie. She also can't agree to have her children be forced to go back and forth between 2 homes. She's a very engaging mom. So she told the court, this I'm relaying to you what she relayed to me. She was updating me yesterday to make sure I had my facts straight. She said she told the judge, I want my children to be able to stay in the home they've always known. If my husband wants a divorce, let him leave. I'm a stay-at-home mom. Let me be at home. My husband can come back anytime he wants. So it was up to the judge. What the judge did is kicked her out of the house, ordered the husband to pay her some spousal support. Now, where they lived in New Jersey, they were both lawyers, so they lived in a nice neighborhood. She cannot afford, even with this spousal support, any place suitable for 3 children. She has a son and 2 daughters to sleep overnight. So she's in a 1-bedroom apartment close to the marital home. The husband stays in the marital home, and then she has to pay him child support because he has primary custody of the children. This is normal, but usually it's the dads that have that happen. And with no fault, I mean, the stories I hear, it's like, I have to pray to the Holy Spirit to give me peace to help these people not lose it, because it is so unjust. If you have kids, and your kids are taken away from you, and then you're betrayed by the person who promised to raise those kids with you before, it's really bad. I've heard being divorced against your will is worse than having your spouse die, because there's the betrayal, it never ends, there's the confusion, it's not enough said. So that's my friend in New Jersey. Oh, okay, that's what the civil court did. Then what happened in the church? She used one of the petitions that I publicized on the website. She asked the church to intervene. They wouldn't give her a reason in writing for rejecting her. Instead, they wanted her to meet with 2 people from the chancery. Because she was a lawyer, she's pretty good at holding her ground, understanding what's going on, taking good mental notes after she gets out of there. So they basically told her, you don't have any rights to anything. We're sorry. We will pray for you. And you can go to the marriage and family office and you can get help for the divorce and separated. You can get help for the divorce process. You can get divorce support help in the diocese. But if they have divorce support help that's from the lady who started the divorce survival guide, the help is going to be the church doesn't have any teaching about divorce. It's just something people go through sometimes. So that's what happened in an in-person meeting. And then she wrote up a letter to the diocese asking them to be more clear. And by this time, I can say confidently that I've become an expert on the procedure on how to help people protect their rights in both annulment and separation cases. So she needed to get something from the diocese in writing why they were rejecting her when she was going to appeal, rather than just this meeting. So they used this letter from Cardinal Coco Palermo, the one where he turned the canon law upside down, and they told her, see, he told us that you have no rights, in so many words, and all she was asking for is what the canon law asked for. And then to add insult to injury, they said, we are obligated to follow the government law on this stuff. And so she's got this all in writing. I've written blogs about it without naming her. I've identified the diocese, it was Metuchen. Her case is on appeal. She may or may not be able to find a canon lawyer who's over there, who's willing to go against Cardinal Coco Palermo. He's not in that job anymore. But it's like, we are onto something that's raising controversy all over the place, I think. Because why would some little lady who's supposed to be making cookies with her kids get a response from the guy in charge of the Pontifical Council of Legislative Tax? Like, what's going on? So that is the end of my description of how the church is messed up. So when I started this work, I had hopes, and one of my hopes was there was a civil lawyer who put together a document that people could sign when they get married. Let me go over this. This is the tall story. You can't see how pretty this is, but we made this as pretty as we possibly could, and it's got the marriage promises on it, and it's real lovely, and it's got this wax seal, and people could sign it when they get married. It's just the marriage right. I promise to be good to you in good times and bad, and raise children according to the law of Christ in this church. And then there's this accompanying booklet, and I've got copies of the language in this booklet, trying to spread the word, where people can actually sign an arbitration agreement saying that if we have conflict, we're not going to go to the civil court. So people we're inviting people to sign a contract saying if we have a dispute, we're going to go to the ecclesiastical court, and we're not going to go to divorce court. And then it would kind of be a way, the hope was this would be a way to kind of make the church have more power over protecting people in no fault who don't want to be divorced, or at least get separation plans that are in accord with divine law. Then, another goal that I had was that people could file petitions in the church asking for intervention so that they could have someone instructed whether or not you have a legitimate reason to be separated. And if someone's a serious Catholic, and the church was to officially approach them saying, look, you can't do what you're doing and call yourself a good Catholic, and you need to work on trying to get the right kind of help, and hey, there's other people who had the same problems you had, you can do this, that would be much better than what's happening now, which is nothing. Or worse, you've fallen out of love, so your marriage is over. But I've been having a hard time getting any of this moving, so I just became more the person who helps separated spouses and shows them how in canon law to keep appealing to try to get something good. And I was asking myself, like, what's the point? Like, I throw mud at walls. I hope something sticks. People are happy when they find other separated faithful, because at least they, it's like, okay, somebody gets it. And have you heard that Our Lady of Fatima told Sister Lucia that Satan says his last battle is going to be marriage and the family?
Yep. Yes.
And if you stand for marriage, you're going to be persecuted. But take heart, and I'm paraphrasing, her Immaculate Heart triumphs in the end, she triumphs in the end.
Yeah.
So if this is Satan's last battle, I'm seeing it out, and I'm connecting the people who are living through it, holding on to each other in the trenches, because like this hurts. Or maybe we're just in a really dark phase of the church, and it's going to have to get better eventually. But in the meantime, these faithful spouses, I mean, I thought I knew serious Catholics before. The people that I know, they're just they're so real, they're so sincere. It's like they're really hurting, and they love the spouse. They want the spouse's soul. They feel bad that, like, say, he's trapped in his anger, and he thinks that's the way to go, and he doesn't have hope. It's a beautiful model. And I brought some copies of the book that Separated Faithful use, The Gift of Self. It goes through phases that Separated Faithful might go through, and it's like it talks about forgiveness when the other person still keeps hurting you, and you try to model Christ's love for your spouse. I mean, it's really good stuff for anybody. Or how, when you have a really bad suffering that you can't stop, you can't change, you didn't choose, what do you do? What do you do with that? I mean, this isn't like an incident that happened 7 years ago. It happens for the rest of your life. Because, daddy brings his new girlfriend, and what do you do when so-and-so's baptism? It's like, it's a mess. So I was thinking about Maximum Kolbe. My husband and I started at St. Maxwell, co-founded, really, he started it. A Knights of Immaculata chapter, which is St. Maximum Kolbe's thing. And I was thinking about how when he was going to die, he's doing all this great publishing and teaching, and he's got all these hundreds and hundreds of brothers helping him out. Then the Nazis come, and he's in a Nazi prison camp, and somebody escapes, so the punishment when you escape is that people in your group have to starve to death. So he volunteered to take a husband and father's place. So we used to call him Uncle Max in my family. So there's Uncle Max in the starvation bunker. And normally people in starvation bunkers, from what I understand, they kind of go insane. Like, they just are really bad. They were singing, they were praying. We can guess the Catholics went to confession. He might have had some converts. Someone stuck him some bread. Maybe he had a little Eucharist. Like, they all went out with dignity. So the kind of the position that we're at with Mary's Advocates right now is we can't control what people in the church do. We can't control what the government does. But we can, for each other, do what Uncle Max did in the starvation bunker. It's like, you only live once, and it's bigger than what's happening right now. Any questions?
So we don't have the usual roving microphone. So can anybody who wants to ask a question just speak up very loudly, and then they can repeat the question for the recording.
Stand up.
Stand up and ask your question.
So you've mentioned the arbitration contract.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're in a place now when the marriage contract isn't really a contract. It's basically just a status you can jump in and out of the civil contract. And there's no real penalties for leaving it early or anything like that. So can you speak more about that contract and what kind of legal teeth would that have?
Yeah, I have some over there. I'll just do it from what I remember. It's 2 parts, and it was put together with the help of a constitutional law expert. And the goal is that it would be something that's enforceable in the civil court. So if parties sign this when they marry, the first half of it is kind of a high-level description of what marriage is, like openness to children. And then the second part of it is this arbitration agreement, where they specify if we have a conflict, we would designate this third-party arbitrator, which is, the local ecclesiastical authority to enforce canon law or doctrine or something like that. So a scenario could be, Anthony files for divorce, and then his wife goes to the civil court and says, right away, instead of the normal answer is I either don't want the divorce or that you get tricked into saying I want a divorce too, because they think you have to. Sorry. It could play out in that the defendant would bring this agreement to the civil court, and then they're faced with an arbitration agreement, which is some binding. I mean, there's some places, and I have heard that with children, the government designates itself as always having the ultimate power to decide best interests of children. But if with money, for example, if an abandoning husband who's committing adultery is told, well, you're in the church, so you pretty much have to give 85% of your money for the rest of your life to your wife and children. That's better than what's happening now. Is that,
Yeah, my question is, because I've thought about a similar concept, has that been tested at all?
no.
Okay.
No, I mean, this is where my hopes came in, because when I first started doing this, like, oh, this is such a great idea, people are going to want to do it. And I was publicizing it to marriage family offices, and we tried to make it as pretty as possible. I have had almost no momentum on it. I have over at the table for grabbing anyone who wants to just read this document I'm talking about, yeah. So, it's over there. And you can get this off our website, anyone can download it for free. The real pretty one, you know, we ask people to help cover the cost because it's very labor intensive. I mean, because there is a guy in Virginia right now who is working with the grassroots movement where they're trying to find a legislator who will introduce legislation where the ecclesiastical authorities of the state of Virginia would have some kind of a voice to the legislators designating which of the grounds apply to people in their religious affiliation. That's a start. So at least you can't have no fault. There's a question back there.
Yes, I was wondering why that the Catholic Church doesn't have adequate premarital preparation, counseling, instruction, you know, like not the pre-planner that's just a little mini thing.
Okay, so you're asking about why I think the Catholic Church doesn't have good premarital preparation?
And it's not good, it's like practically non-existent. And then just everyone gets check mark that they.
I can't speak for every diocese
And
because
then these problems come out a little bit later, and then
there's two things I would say to that. One is the priest's role when parties are going to get married, it's actually an investigation to see if they want Catholic marriage. So preparation should be happening everywhere and anywhere. And different dioceses do different things. Like there's a guy in Colorado Springs who I think his program is really good. And there's a lot of online programs now. They cover different things. This audience probably knows the church is bleeding. You know, if Jesus Christ himself were in charge, he'd still have to work with human beings. And you'd have to have a budget. So even if he had an unlimited budget, who's he going to get to do all this good work? I mean, things are so messed up.
Yeah, it's more like an observation. I think that, thank you for your talk, first of all, because I've seen these things happen through friends and in general, and I think a big part of it, I think she touched on, is the preparation for it. I think a lot of Catholics don't understand what it means to be married. And that's the impression that I get, and I think that it would be good if they had a lay organization that worked on preparing Catholic families to develop. Young people, when they get married, you have a not-for-profit where you teach them how it's really supposed to be done. Because it looks like a lot of people that should be doing that are not.
So this is a question again about the lack of good marriage prep. And it's like...
And even follow-up.
Oh, I know. Well,
So,
there's a couple I want to give a plug to. Greg and Julie Alexander, they're in Texas. They've been doing marriage coaching because they themselves, and they've been doing it full time, and they just bought a facility where people can come and make little retreats. They've been doing this for like 25 years. They were on the brink of divorce, and they both wanted a divorce, and they went to a priest, and they thanked God that the priest challenged them, go find out what marriage is really about. And then Greg promised that if we restore our marriage, I will dedicate the rest of my life to helping people have stronger marriages. And he has a very high success rate. And they do marriage prep, if someone wants to go down and see them. But also, Cardinal Burke talks about how marriage is natural. So how much marriage prep do you, I mean, people were getting married and they knew what they were doing centuries ago. Do you want permanence or do you want a substitute for you? Is that so hard?
Yeah, but that's when you're looking at it from the inside. But when you're on the outside, since there's so much in the media and in society that's telling you to go the other way, and then the courts are supporting it, and the Catholic Church in certain instances is kind of supporting what the civil, then they need somebody to say, because I've seen a lot of studies where people talk about how, I read an article how, and it's not a Catholic person who wrote the article that said, you shouldn't even live together before you get married.
Sure.
And he gave the reason. So
Yeah.
when you talk about it's natural and it's right, but a lot of people don't understand that.
You're asking a question that I don't know the answer to. It's like, how do we solve the problem of people not going in with the right understanding of marriage? Yeah?
I'm going to come from two places, both from having worked in the divorce courts and from having been a public school teacher for 18 years. The kids that I taught, and I taught up in the Bronx for pretty much all of my time as a teacher, I think I could count on two hands the numbers of children who came from intact homes. When you say marriage prep, when we were children growing up, we knew what marriage was about. We had our parents, we had our friends' parents, you could see it. You could see it every day. The children that I taught, there were no stable relationships. When I started teaching, you would often have a stable set of grandparents, then it was a stable grandmother.
I'm going to try to repeat what you're saying for the sake of the
Yeah.
recording. You're talking about how you've worked in divorce court and you've also taught in public schools in the Bronx, and most all the families were broken families.
Exactly.
So is there a question, or it's just like you're...
No, it's a comment.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
comment, and I will bring it,
Yeah.
bring it to a rapid close. But the point is that we need to reestablish in our culture, in our Catholic culture, an understanding, and it's going to grow very...
Yeah, her point is that we need to reestablish in a Catholic culture what marriage is, and you're right. Because if the Catholics aren't even doing it right, forget the world, but if the Catholics were to try to do it right, where the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
Like some husband might leave the church because, oh, you said I was an adulterer. Well, isn't it better that we said something than instead give annulments to 60% of the petitioners?
Yeah.
Go ahead, back.
I've been part of this person.
Oh,
Yeah, it sounds like that prenup is kind of like a prenup. You
Yes.
know, and doesn't that sort of cast a shadow over what you're walking into?
yeah. He's asking whether this document I was describing is like a prenup, and isn't that kind of casting a shadow because we aren't supposed to do prenups? Normally, a prenup is, what are we going to do if we get divorced with the property and maybe with the children? I don't really know, you might say.
Yeah.
This is a prenup that says if we have a conflict, we aren't going to go to the civil forum. We are going to have our conflict managed by the ecclesiastical forum. And if they were doing, the dioceses aren't even set up to do this, I know that. But if they were, like maybe they were a century ago, like in my diocese, I found a document, I think it was 1940, and it's describing there's an office in the marriage and family office run by a priest. If you think you might need reason to be separated, you have to go there, you meet with this priest, he investigates something, and he informs the bishop what his findings were. So it's not a prenup about divorce, it's a prenup against divorce.
Right.
Do you have a question?
I guess it's more of a comment than a
Comment.
question, but certainly I'd like your take on the comment. Well, it seems like this is actually a symptom of a bigger problem, what you've described. For quite some time, it seems like not only the society that we have, but the Catholic Church in such flawed societies, ours and others, have actually gone and they decided to ride with the tide and go with the flow.
Right.
Now, it seems like...
Let me pause a minute. The guy's commenting that the Catholic Church in our society is going with the tide of the church. That's what he seems like is happening. Oh. They caught me. Maybe we can cut that for him. He's saying the opposite, that the church is looks like it's taking the side of the society. The church is going, like at the beginning of my point, it's going through man's view rather than standing firm for God's view.
And of course, the flaw not only of our society, but societies throughout the world, is that the human being is not a creature made in the image and likeness of God, but is actually a biochemical mechanical
Right.
unit. Now, the thing is, if we are creatures made in the image and likeness of God, then we, first of all, as an understanding, we're supposed to know that we're not like livestock when it comes to our approach to sex. Our approach to sex has to be one that reflects the fact that we are creatures made in the image and likeness of God.
Right, so you're commenting about the sexual revolution going not good, and people don't understand
That's right.
what the procreative act is even for, they're abusing it.
And that, I think, is part of the problem. People confuse sensual attraction of one kind or another with love. That's one thing.
You know, for the sake of the recording, maybe we should do comments and like chit chat after questions are done, because maybe questions when you're done. Or you wanted my take on that?
Yeah. And then also, it seems like if we are creatures made in the image and likeness of God, as the most holy Trinity is a permanence, an eternity, the eternal family of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, then the family being is to be a reflection of the most holy Trinity, one God. The husband, the wife in a permanent relationship, and children proceeding from their most sacred marital love, being a model of the Holy Spirit, just as the Holy Spirit proceeds from both the Father and the Son, the mutual love that they have for one another. The children are supposed to proceed from the mutual love of the husband and the wife for one another. And like I said before, it's supposed to be a permanent relationship, as permanent as you can get in this world, which is until death do you part.
I mean, you're kind of describing God's plan for marriage, and it's also natural marriage. Like, the church recognizes people who aren't Catholic who enter marriages, they can still enter a valid marriage.
Yes.
So like on a Catholic dating website, women will list themselves as divorced, and other women will list themselves as annulling. So we can assume that if they're listing themselves as divorced, they were married outside the church, and they were divorced.
Is that what they say on the site? I don't
because
know.
then then they're like, well, yeah, I was married outside the church.
He's saying
All I
Catholic
need
dating
is a little-
websites make a distinction between someone who posts as being divorced as compared to someone who posts as being
Yeah,
annulled.
and I said, all I need is a little slip of paper from the archdiocese that we sign, and then I'm good to go, I can get remarried. Whereas an annulment is, they were married in the Catholic Church, and they divorced, and the marriage was just called null. So
Yes and no. It's like there's sometimes. Is there a question?
Yeah.
Tell me,
What should they be putting down? What does that mean?
What do I think? Okay.
What does that mean when it says divorce?
I think you would ask the website what it means, and they should tell the reader what it means. If you have the question is when you go to a singles website for people to find people to date, someone might list themselves as divorced, someone might list themselves as annulled, and what does that mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I know what annul means. So annul means they went through a process and they have an annulment. But if they're divorced, it may be that they have a really simple case. There's different kinds of cases that don't require the whole juridic process. Some are very simple. Like, if I was a Catholic, I fell away from the church, I married some guy that I thought was swell at the courthouse, we don't have a Catholic marriage. He's just my boyfriend. And the civil court thinks we're married, but I'm not. So if I was divorced in that circumstance, then maybe.
Yeah.
I'll take the host's prerogative of asking one last question. It looks like most of the rest of the question. So Pope Francis made some controversy in one of his airplane interviews where he said, and I don't remember the number, but a very large number of Catholic marriages are invalid. And I guess it's sort of a two-part question. The first is sort of, what is your view on how prevalent invalid marriages actually are based on everything that's going on in the world? And sort of second, what are the consequences of the Pope publicly saying that he thinks most Catholic marriages are invalid?
All right, unless I wrote those down, I'm gonna get mixed up. So let me start with the second one. What do I think are the consequences of an interview where the news is saying the Pope says that most marriages are invalid?
Not good. Not good. Well, the interesting thing about that, I think it was June, I think it was an airplane, and they had posted it like on the Vatican news site. They actually edited it. So they changed it after, they changed what he said, and then people on the internet are posting, maybe it was in Spanish or Italian, I don't remember. He said something, and there was video of him saying it, and he said most. And then at the Vatican, whoever sends out the news, they kind of toned it down a little bit. So, and this is part of the reason I think this idea is interesting of signing an agreement, because if you went in and you actually didn't intend permanence, and you're realizing, oh, I don't have the no fault, and it's like you have to think about it more. It's like, oh, this might be held up in a civil court. Like, what does this mean? It might make some people filter out people who don't intend real marriage. So what was your first question?
Just sort of what's your take on, I mean, we realize that annulments are easily granted, but do you have a sense, and that seems to be an injustice, but do you have a sense that a lot of marriages are in fact correctly judged to be null?
I wouldn't want to answer that in a general way, because the perspective I have is separated faithful. Those are the people who I'm interacting with. So I'm seeing their experiences, and I'm reading stuff about scholarly journals that are talking about particular grounds, the psychological ground that's used a lot. So, and when you've got Bishop Morlino, and you've got Cardinal Raymond Burke, and you've got Pope Benedict, and you've got Pope Pope John Paul II, all saying that there's a problem here. And then another book written by a Notre Dame professor whose wife abandoned him, she filed for annulment, he had a proceeding that was very unjust, he appealed and it got overturned. He wrote a book about injustices and annulment, and he, during the time he wrote his book, 95% of the cases that were granted in the US for psychological grounds, well, it's hard to say, of the cases that were granted in the US for psychological grounds that were appealed to Rome, 95% of them were overturned, and the US tribunals were told, you're doing it wrong. So, and you get the last question.
I did say it would be the last question. I thought one more hand raised.
I want to ask, with the psychological grounds, isn't that like
let me elaborate a little more.
Isn't that in like a matter of in sickness and health? The person's
okay, yeah. The psychological grounds for annulment. If you were stone drunk when I got you to sell me your car for $12, you could go and say that was an invalid contract because I couldn't understand what I was doing. Well, in a marriage, there are reasons where their psychological makeup can be so mixed up that they cannot understand and properly use their will to choose the essential properties of marriage. It's rights and obligations.
So it kind of be more fraud, no?
Hmm?
That would be more fraud.
More Freud?
Fraud.
Oh, fraud?
Yeah.
It depends on like culpability. Like if you're committing fraud, this is where I don't help people write their briefs arguing to support their position. I point them to a book published by Ignatius Press that has like 60 pages on psychological grounds for annulment, or this book by Robert Fasoli, or this new lady dissertation that's this thick that I haven't even finished reading. It's really difficult reading. What I do know is when they dumb it down or make the bar so high that they just use things like general immaturity, or they describe some difficulties you had in your upbringing, that's the wrong way to do it. And it's Canon 1095 too, and it's grave lack of discretion and judgment about the essential obligations and rights of marriage. And I see what tribunals do. I know a case where the guy got the sentence. He was the petitioner, but he just filled in a questionnaire. They only wrote lack of discretion on him. So he didn't see the word grave. He didn't see discretion about what. It just said lack of discretion. So for all he knows, I married a woman who's a real piece of work, and I didn't have the good enough wisdom to judge that. He didn't even know. They had the grounds written in Latin on the final sentence, so he couldn't read the grounds, which isn't very nice.
I think we need to stop the formal program.
Okay.
Maybe we can do some informal questions afterward. Thank you very much.
I have one last thing.
Oh, she has something
I did
else to
bring
say?
with me handouts when you walked in. So that's the articles and this little flyer, my controversial flyer. And I also have some copies of the paperback book that the Separated Faithful use on that table over there. So if you want one of those, come get one. And I have the document, the arbitration agreement document. Okay, thanks, Thomas.
Thank you so much.